Do the Chicago Bulls have a plan for their franchise? I just am. These last few years, this isn't this year, this is the last few years in general, that have made me seriously wonder, like, what is the plan for the Bulls? And what are the people running this franchise thinking? Because they're just the best example of basketball purgatory that I can come up with right now in the NBA. And I feel like they're just in this constant state of in-between where they're not good enough to matter, but they're not bad enough to truly rebuild. Like, what's the plan for this team? I want to talk about that in this video because, I mean, an 18-point loss to the Wizards is embarrassing. Just plain and simple. It's the type of loss that goes, yeah, you're not even on par with the good teams. You're not competitive, and yet you're 15-19 because you won't get rid of guys and you won't try to be bad either. Like, they're in the in-between and the bad in-between. Exactly where you don't want to be. Exactly where kind of the Kings are in the Western Conference right now. It's the spot you don't want to be in the NBA more than any other, in my opinion. But before we hop into the video, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Help me push towards the 2,000 subscriber mark on the channel. I upload every single day, multiple videos a day. Would really appreciate it if y'all do subscribe. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. Let's talk about it. So, embarrassing loss, no doubt about it, to the Bulls. Losing by 18 points, or to the Wizards, I should say. Losing by 18 points is embarrassing regardless, really, but especially when it's the worst team in the league. Like, that's really, really bad. A second half where they were outscored by 14 points in total. Just plain and simple, not good enough. And it's not like there were injuries that caused this loss. They had everybody healthy and still got their butts whipped. Just did not play well enough. Vucevic had one of his rare inefficient games. He's actually been their best player of the season, has been really good, but tonight was not. Levine with 32 was not even really close to enough to get a win in this game. And I just look at this team and I just don't understand what the plan is. Because let's look at the standings, y'all. This is the 10 seed in the East, a pretty weak Eastern Conference that very clearly has like 6 top teams in the top 6 seeds. And then Miami and Indiana are at least competitive. The Pistons have figured some stuff out with Cade Cunningham and look to be building and also have the assets to improve their roster if they chose to. And then you have the Sixers, who are playing better as of late with Embiid, Maxey, and Paul George all finally healthy, or at least mostly healthy. And look, wouldn't be a surprise at all to see the Bulls miss the play-in entirely. Like, and if they do make the play-in, I think me and everybody else will be picking against them to actually make the finals, as Archer wants to say hi. But point being, y'all, I just realistically don't see a serious path towards contention for the Chicago Bulls. Like, not even towards contention. There's not even a reasonable path, in my opinion, towards the playoffs. Like, and losing in the first round isn't great in the first place, but they're not even going to do that. And you look at this team, you look at where they are this season, and you clearly just quickly have to wonder, what is the plan for this team? Because let's look at the roster, y'all. I mean, their best players are Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, both of whom are actually having very efficient, very good all-around seasons. And guys who, while maybe a bit overpaid, at least in LaVine's situation especially, would actually be useful for playoff teams this year. I don't think they would get a lot for LaVine still because of his contract, and we'll talk about the contract situation with this team here in just a second. But LaVine and Vucevic are clearly their 2 best players, clearly the 2 guys who are holding them back from being a legitimately bad team. But those 2 guys continue to hold them back to where they're like a chunk behind all the really bad teams in terms of trying to get an actual realistic top pick at this point in the season. Teams like the Nets have finally given up, although they should have maybe done it before the season, to be honest. But then the Hornets, Raptors, Wizards, Blazers, even Jazz, Pelicans, like these teams are all clearly in a worse spot, or a better spot to lose, I should say, than the Chicago Bulls are. And yet the Bulls seem to make no moves and really no interest in making moves unless they, I guess, get some sort of unrealistic price that they're not going to get for these players. So you look at the numbers, and it's not only the fact that they haven't made moves and haven't downgraded their roster to try to fully commit to a rebuild. It's the fact that outside of Kobe White, none of these young players, at least in my opinion, are guys who are really translating to looking like future stars or potential stars even in the NBA. Like, Kobe White's not probably a future star, but he's a good player. He's averaging 18 a game, doing not horrible efficiency, like having a pretty solid year. Assist turnover ratio is okay. Like, he's not a bad player by any means. But outside of that, I mean, DeSumo's a good defender, but he's a 12-point per game scorer and not an efficient shooter. Josh Giddey will never be an efficient shooter, it seems like. He's still young, but he hasn't improved much at all over these last 2 seasons statistically. Lonzo Ball is older. Patrick Williams is being paid $18 million a year to just be fine. Like, he doesn't look like he's ever going to merge into anything other than a role player himself. And outside of that, like, you look at the rest of the roster, Julian Phillips, they traded 2 second-round picks for him. He's kind of just there. Dalen Terry was a first-round pick. He's kind of just into rotation, not even really a serious rotation guy. Montes Buzelis has struggled big time as the 8th overall pick this year. Like, you just look up and down this roster. There's not a ton of depth. There's not a ton of talent. and there's not a ton of young talent. So like, so the salary situation is the one thing that I think holds them back from being able to make quite as many trades as they'd probably like. But Vucevic is making $20 and $21 million a year. That is not a bad contract. There are teams that would 100%, I think, use and love to have a Nikola Vucevic in the fold. He's a guy who I actually think could be a real asset with real value to other teams. And they might actually be able to get a decent amount of stuff for him. But I mean, Levine's contract, yes, it's bad. That's their own fault for giving him that in the first place. But he's still, I would think, relatively tradable. There's some team that could talk themselves into giving up something small for Levine. Lonzo Ball has a player option this year. So, I mean, he's an expiring contract after this season, right? So I know he hasn't played very well or very much so far this season for the Bulls, but there is an impact defensively. He has the highest plus minus on the team in the minutes that he's played so far this season in terms of on-off numbers. Like, I do think Lonzo's been pretty good in the minutes he's played, despite the lack of efficiency. He's a guy who would garner interest on the trade market. And I just don't know why they haven't committed really now and before the season and over the last few years to trying to make trades. I mean, you look at this team, their first round pick this year is top 10 protected. So first things first, you want to make sure that you get a top 10 pick this year so that you can hold on to your first round pick in this tough conference, or in this really good draft, I should say. And so you look at the league-wide standings. Do they have a bottom 10 record in the league right now? Yes, they do. Do they also have the 10th worst record in the league? Yes. So that means that the lottery could very easily flip things around and the Bulls could wind up with the 11th pick and losing their first round pick this year, which is a tough spot to be for a team that is already bad. And in a draft this good, ideally you'd want to be in the race for a top 4 pick. But they're not, and they're not even really close. At this point, they're 7 games back of being in that contention for the top 4 pick. Like, that's just out of the realm of possibility at this point. They don't have a bunch of extra picks. They have traded their next 3 years of second round picks. I mean, they have a lottery protected Portland pick that's obviously not going to convey this year because Portland's a lottery team. They have, I don't know what the protections are on that for that past this year. They might get a Portland pick next year or the year after, but they have 2025 Sacramento second, but then just their own first in 26, just their own first in 27, just their own first in 28, plus I guess 2 second round picks, not 1. But I mean, they waited too long to trade DeMar DeRozan. They only got 2 second round picks in terms of things with actual value out of him. You look at the numbers, they're still very clearly a bad team. They're 14th in offensive rating, which isn't awful, but it's also not amazing. And defensive rating wise, they're 24th in the league. Like, that's obviously clearly not good at all. This is not a team that I think you can look at by any serious metric and go, oh yeah, this NBA team is going to be competitive. They have the 8th worst net rating in the league, y'all. This is a bad team. And yet they refuse to commit to tanking and rebuilding. And I just don't see what the plans are for the future if you're not going to do that. I don't get it. I mean, you look at the trades, they should have realistically been making trades years ago to commit to a rebuild when it was clear that they didn't have a serious chance at contention. But instead, the only trades they've made were trading DeRozan once he had already lost his value, in my opinion, for Chris Duarte in 2 seconds. Like, what does that do for you? Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. That felt like a useless trade. I feel like they definitely could have gotten more value out of Caruso than Josh Giddey, who, in my opinion, has not been great. Julian Phillips, they traded 2 second round picks for him. He's done nothing off the bench. They acquired Derek Jones Jr. just to sit him on the bench and have him leave in the free agency, despite the fact that, excuse me, despite the fact that Chicago had him, he only became useful once he was a non-Bull anymore. Like, he basically was a mid to end of bench guy for them and then became a contributor in Dallas and now is one in Los Angeles for the Clippers as well. Trading for DeRozan, they didn't give up like a ton of assets, but they gave up that protected first round pick that will eventually convey somewhere in the next few years. Like, you look at the trades they've made over the past several seasons, and they're just not trades that really ever, besides the 21-22 season, prior to injuries, prior to things going badly, ever put them in a position to attempt to contend. I don't hate the trades up through this DeMar trade, and it was working for a while. When Lonzo was healthy, when things were going well, there was a stretch there where they were the 1 seed in the East and looked like the hot team on the block in 21-22. Since then, 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25. Now, no significant moves made over these past few years to commit toward a rebuild, and it's just set them up for a really, really tough future, I think, in this league. And I just think, again, they're making the mistake of just accepting complete and utter mediocrity for what, the 4th season in a row now? Like, or at least 3rd season in a row. It's just bad. It's embarrassing, and it's not good enough. Like, you want to see better from an NBA franchise with as much prestige and history as the Chicago Bulls. I feel bad for y'all Bulls fans, man. I really do. with that being said, I hope y'all did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with more NBA content very, very soon. I appreciate y'all. Peace.